And And even if she was nearly 40, there were those lips, those bright red lips that were as appealing as her daughter's. This, however, was not the whole story. In the final analysis, Matahachi did not have the courage to let Oko and Akemi see him walking as a day laborer. He had grown lazy and soft. The young man who dressed in silk and could distinguish Nada sake from the local brew by its taste was a far cry from the simple, ragged Matahachi who had been at the Sekigahara. The worst aspect was that living this strange life with an older woman had robbed him of his youthfulness. In years he was still young, but in spirit he was dissolute and spiteful, lazy and resentful. But I'll do it, he vowed. I'll get out now, giving himself a final angry blow on the head. He jumped to his feet, shouting, I will get out of here this very day. As he listened to his own voice, it suddenly sank in that there was no one around to hold him back, nothing that actually bound him to this house. The only thing he really owned and could not leave behind was his sword, and this he quickly slipped into his obi. Biting his lips, he said determinedly, After all, I am a man. He could have marched out the front door waving his sword like a victorious general. But by force of habit, he jumped into his dirty sandals and left by the kitchen door. So far, so good. He was out of doors, but now what? His feet came to a halt. He stood motionless in the refreshing breeze of early spring. It was not the light dazzling his eyes had kept him from moving. The question was, where was he headed? At that moment, it seemed to Matahachi that the world was a vast turbulent sea on which there was nothing to cling to. Aside from Kyoto, his experience encompassed only his village life and one battle. As he puzzled over his situation, a sudden thought sent him scurrying like a puppy back through the kitchen door. I need money, he said to himself. I will certainly have to have some money. Going straight to Oko's room, he rummaged through her toilet boxes, her mirror stand, her chest of drawers, and everywhere else he could think of. He ransacked the place, but found no money at all. Of course, he should have realized Oko wasn't the type of woman who would fail to take precautions against something like this. Frustrated, Matahachi flopped down on the clothes that still lay on the floor. The scent of Oko lingered like a thick mist about her red silk underrobe, her Nishijin obi, and her Momoyama dye kimono. By now, he reflected, she would be at the open-air theater by the river, watching the kabuki dances with Toji at her side. He formed an image of her white skin and that provoking, coquettish face. The evil slut, he cried. Bitter and murderous thoughts arose from his very bowels. Then, unexpectedly, he had a painful recollection of Otsu. As the days and months of their separation added up, he had grown at last to understand the purity and devotion of the girl who had promised to wait for him. He would gladly have bowed down and lifted his hands in supplication to her if he had thought she would never forgive him. But he had broken with Otsu, abandoned her in such a way that it would be impossible to face her again. All for the sake of that woman, he thought ruefully. Now that it was too late, everything was clear to him. He should never have let Oko know that Otsu existed. When Oko had first heard of the girl, she had smiled a little smile and pretended not to mind in the slightest. But in fact, she was consumed with jealousy. Afterward, whenever they quarreled, she would raise the subject and insist that he write a letter breaking his engagement. And when he finally gave in and did so, she had brazenly enclosed a note in her own obviously feminine hand and carelessly had the missive delivered by an impersonal runner. What must Osu think of me? Groaned Matahachi sorrowfully. The image of her innocent girlish face came to his mind, a face full of reproach. Once again he saw the mountains and the river in Mimasaka. He wanted to call out to his mother, to his relatives. They had been so good. Even the soil now seemed to have been warm and comforting. I can never go home again, he thought. I threw all of it away for enraged afresh, he dumped Oko's clothes out of the closed chest and ripped them apart, strewing strips and pieces all over the house. Slowly he became aware of someone calling from the front door. Pardon me, said the voice. I'm from the Yoshioka School. Are the young master and Toji here? How should I know? Replied Matahachi gruffly. They must be here. I know it's rude to disturb them when they have gone off to have some fun, but something terribly important has happened. It involves the good name of the Yoshioka School. Go away, don't bother me. Please, can't you at least give them a message? Tell them that a swordsman named Miyamoto Musashi has appeared at the school and that, well, none of our people can get the better of him. He's waiting for the young master to return, refuses to budge until he has had a chance to face him. Please tell them to hurry home. Miyamoto? Miyamoto? The Wheel of Fortune. It was a day of unforgettable shame for the Yoshioka School. Never before had this prestigious center of the martial arts suffered such total humiliation. Ardent, ardent disciples sat around in abject despair, long faces and whitened knuckles mirroring their distress and frustration. One large group was in the wood floor at anteroom, smaller groups in the side rooms. It was already twilight when ordinarily they would have been heading home or out to drink. No one made a move to leave. The funereal silence was broken only by the occasional clatter of the front gate. Is that him? Is the young master back? No, not yet. This from a man who had spent half the afternoon leaning disconsolately against a column at the entranceway. Each time this happened, the men sank deeper into their morass of gloom. Tongues clicked in dismay and eyes shone with pathetic tears. The doctor, coming out of a back room, said to the men at the entranceway, I understand Seijiro isn't here. Don't you know where he is? No, men are looking out for him. He will probably be back soon. The doctor harangued and departed. No, in front of the school, the candle on the altar of the Hachiman shrine was surrounded by a sinister corona. No one would have denied that the founder and first master, Yoshioka Kempo, was a far greater man than Seijiro or his younger brother. Campbell had started life as a mere tradesman, a dyer of clothes, but in the course of endlessly repeating the rhythms and movements of pace resist dyeing, he had conceived of a new way of handling the short sword. After learning the use of the halberd from one of the most skillful of the warrior priests at Kurama and then studying the Kyohachi style of swordsmanship, he had then created a style completely his own. His short sword technique had subsequently been adopted by the Ashikaga shoguns, who summoned him to be an official tutor. Kempo had been a guest master, a man whose wisdom was equal to his skill. Although his sons, Seijiro and Denshichiro, had received training as rigorous as their fathers, they had fallen heir to his considerable wealth and fame, and that, in the opinion of some, was the cause of their weakness. Seijiro was customarily addressed as young master, but he had not really attained the level of skill that would attract a large following. Students came to the school because under Kempo, the Yoshioka style of fighting had become so famous that just gaining entrance meant being recognized by society as a skilled warrior. After the fall of the Ashikaga shogunate 3 decades earlier, the house of Yoshioka had ceased to receive an official allowance, but during the lifetime of the frugal Kempo, it had gradually accumulated a great deal of wealth. In addition, it had this large establishment on Shijo Avenue with more students than any other school in Kyoto, which was by far the largest city in the country. But in truth, the school's position at the top level in the world of swordsmanship was a matter of appearances only. The world outside these great white walls had changed more than most of the people inside realized. For years they had boasted, loafed, and played around, and time had, as it will, passed them by. Today their eyes have been opened by their disgraceful loss to an unknown country swordsman. A little before noon, one of the servants came to the dojo and reported that a man who called Musashi was at the door, requesting admittance. Asked what sort of a fellow he was, the servant replied that he was a ronin, that he hailed from Miyamoto in Mimasaka, was 21 or 22 years old, about 6 feet tall, and seemed rather dull. His hair, uncombed for at least a year, was carelessly tied up behind in a reddish mop, and his clothing was too filthy to tell whether it was black or brown, plain or figured. The servant, while admitting that he might be mistaken, thought he detected an odor about the man. He did have on his back one of the web leather sacks people call warrior study bags, and this did probably mean he was a shugyosa, one of those samurai, so numerous these days, who wander about devoting their everyday waking hour to the study of swordsmanship. Nevertheless, the servant's overall impression was that this Musashi was distinctly out of place at the Yoshioka School. If the man had simply been asking for a meal, there would have been no problem. But when the group heard that the rustic intruder had come to the great gate to challenge the famous Yoshioka Seijiro to a bout, they burst into uproarious laughter. Some argued for turning him away without further ado, while others said they should first find out what style he employed and the name of his teacher. The servant, as amused as anyone else, left and came back to report that the visitor had, as a boy, learned the use of the truncheon from his father and had later on picked up what he could from warriors passing through the village. He left home when he was 17 and for reasons of his own, spent his 18th, 19th, and 20th years immersed in scholarly studies. All the previous year, he had been alone in the mountains, with the trees and the mountain spirits as his only teachers. Consequently, he couldn't lay claim to any particular style or teacher. But in the future, he hoped to learn the teachings of Kiichi Hogen, master the essence of the Kyohachi style, and emulate the great Yoshioka Kempo by creating a style of his own, which he had already decided to call the Miyamoto style. Despite his many flaws, this was the goal toward which he proposed to walk with all his heart and souls. It was an honest and unaffected answer, the servant conceded, but the man had a country accent and stammered at almost every word. The servant obligingly provided his listeners with an imitation, again throwing them into gales of laughter. The man must be out of his senses to proclaim that his goal was to create a style of his own was sheer madness. By way of enlightening the loud, the students sent the servant out again, this time to ask whether the visitor had appointed anyone to take his corpse away after the bout. To this, Musashi replied, "If by any chance I should be killed, it makes no difference whether you discard my body on Toribe Mountain or throw it into the Kamo River with the garbage. Either way, I promise not to hold it against you." His way of answering this time, said the servant, was very clear, with nothing of the clumsiness of his earlier replies. After a moment's hesitation, someone said, "Let him in." That was how it started, with the disciples thinking they would cut the newcomer up a bit, then throw him out. In the very first bout, however, it was the school's champion who came away the loser. His arm was broken clean through. Only a bit of skin kept his wrist attached to his forearm. One by one, others accepted the stranger's challenge, and one by one they went down in ignominious defeat. Several were wounded seriously, and Musashi's wooden sword dripped with blood. After about the third loss, the disciples' mood turned murderous. If it took every last one of them, they would not let this barbaric madman get away alive, taking the honor of the Yoshioka School with him. Musashi himself ended the bloodshed. Since his challenge had been accepted, he had no qualms about the casualties, but he announced there's no point in continuing until Seijuro returns and refused to fight anymore. There being no alternative, he was shown, at his own request, to a room where he could wait. Only then did one man come to his senses and call for the doctor. It was soon after the doctor left that voices screaming out the names of two of the wounded brought a dozen men to the back room. They clustered around the two samurai in stunned disbelief, their faces ashen and their breathing uneven. Both were dead. Footsteps hurried through the dojo and into the death room. The students made way for Seijuro and Toji. Both were as pale as though they had just emerged from an icy waterfall. "What's going on here?" demanded Toji. "What's the meaning of all this?" His tone was surly, as usual. A samurai kneeling grim-faced by the pillow of one of his dead companions fixed accusing eyes on Toji and said, "You should explain what's going on. You are the one who takes the young master out carousing. Well, this time you've gone too far. Watch your tongue or I'll cut it out." When Master Campbell was alive, a day never passed when he wasn't in the dojo. What of it? The young master wanted a little cheering up, so we went to the kabuki. What do you mean talking that way in front of him? Just who do you think you are? Does he have to stay out all night to see the kabuki? Master Campbell must be turning in his grave. That's enough, cried Toji, lunging toward the man. As others moved in and trying to separate and calm down the two, a voice heavy with pain rose slightly above the sound of the scuffle. If the young master's back, it's time to stop squabbling. It's up to him to retrieve the honor of the school. That Ronin can't leave here alive. Several of the wounded screamed and pounded on the floor. Their agitation was an eloquent rebuke to those who had not faced Musashi's sword. To the samurai of this age, the most important thing in the world was honor. As a class, they virtually competed with each other to see who would be the first to die for it. The government had until recently been too busy with its wars to work out an adequate administrative system for a country at peace. And even Kyoto was governed only by a set of loose, makeshift regulations. Still, the emphasis of the warrior class on personal honor was respected by farmers and townsmen alike, and it played a role in preserving peace. A general consensus regarding what constituted honorable behavior and what did not made it possible for the people to govern themselves even with inadequate laws. The men of the Yoshioka School, though uncultured, were by no means shameless degenerates. When after the initial shock of defeat they returned to their normal selves, the first thing they thought of was honor. The honor of their school, the honor of the master, their own personal honor. Putting aside individual animosities, a large group gathered around Seijuro to discuss what was to be done. Unfortunately, on this of all days, Seijuro felt bereft of fighting spirit. At the moment when he should have been at his best, he was hungover, weak, and exhausted. Where is the man? He asked as he hitched up his kimono sleeves with a leather thong. He's in the small room next to the reception room, said one student, pointing across the garden. Call him, Seijuro commanded. His mouth was dry from tension. He sat down in the master's place, a small raised platform, and prepared himself to receive Musashi's greeting. Choosing one of the wooden swords proffered by his disciples, he held it upright beside him. 3 or 4 men acknowledged the command and started to leave, but Toji and Rohei told them to wait. There ensued a great deal of whispering just out of Seijuro's earshot. The muted consultations centered around Toji and other of the school's senior disciples. Before long, family members and a few retainers joined in, and there were so many heads present that the gathering split into groups. Though heated, the controversy was settled in a relatively short time. The majority, not only concerned about the school's fate, but uncomfortably aware of Seijuro's shortcomings as a fighter, concluded that it would be unwise to let him face Musashi man and man there, then and there. With 2 dead and several wounded, if Seijuro were to lose, the crisis facing the school would become extraordinarily grave. It was too great a risk to take. The unspoken opinion of most of the men was that if Danshichiro were present, there would be little cause for alarm. In general, it was thought that he would have been better suited than Seijuro to carry on his father's work, but being the second son and having no serious responsibilities, he was an exceedingly easygoing type. That morning, he had left the house with friends to go to Issei and hadn't even bothered to say when he would return. Toji approached Seijuro and said, "We have reached a conclusion." As Seijuro listened to the whisper report, his face grew more and more indignant until finally he gasped with barely controlled fury. trick him, Toji trying to silence him with his eyes, but Seijuro was not to be silenced. I can't agree to anything like that. It's cowardly. What if word got out that the Yoshioka School was so afraid of an unknown warrior that it hid and ambushed him? Calm down, Toji pleaded, but Seikwa continued to protest. Drowning him out, Toji said, "Leave it to us, we'll take care of it." But Seijuro would have none of it. "Do you think that I, Yoshioka Seijuro, would lose to this Musashi, or whatever his name is?" "Oh no, it's not that at all," lied Toji. "It's just that we don't see how you would gain any honor by defeating him. You are of much too high a status to take on a brazen vagabond like that. Anyway, there's no reason why anybody outside this house should know anything about it, is there? Only one thing is important, not to let him get away alive." Even while they argued and the number of men in the hall shrank by more than half, as quietly as cats, they were disappearing into the garden, toward the back door and into the inner rooms, fading almost imperceptibly into the darkness. "Young master, we can't put it off any longer," Toji said firmly and blew out the lamp. He loosened his sword in its scabbard and raised his kimono sleeves. Seijuro remained seated, though to some extent relieved at not having to fight the stranger. He was by no means happy. The implication, as he saw it, was that his disciples had a low opinion of his ability. He thought back on how he had neglected practice since his father's death, and the thought made him despondent. The house grew as cold and quiet as the bottom of a well. Unable to sit still, Seijuro got up and stood by the window, though the paper-covered doors of the room given Musashi. He could see the softly flickering light of the lamp. That was the only light anywhere. Quite a number of other eyes were peering in the same direction. The attackers, their swords on the ground in front of them, held their breath and listened intently for any sound that might tell them what Musashi was up to. Toji, whatever his shortcomings, had experienced the training of a samurai. He was trying desperately to figure out what Musashi might do. He's completely unknown in the capital, but he's a great fighter. Could he just be sitting silently in that room? Our approach has been quiet enough, but with this many people pressing in on him, he must have noticed. Anyone trying to make it through life as a warrior would notice, otherwise he would be dead by now. Maybe he has dozed off. It rather looks that way. After all, he's been waiting a long time. On the other hand, he has already proved he is clever. He's probably standing there fully prepared for battle, leaving the lamp lit to put us off guard, just waiting for the fast man to attack. That must be it. That is it. The men were agilely cautious, for the target of their murderous intent would be just as easy to slay them. They exchanged glances, silently asking who would be the first to run forward and risk his life. Finally, the wily Toji, who was just outside Musashi's room, called out, "Musashi, sorry to have kept you waiting. Could I see you for a moment?" There being no answer, Toji concluded that Musashi was indeed ready and waiting for the attack. Vowing not to let him escape, Toji signaled to right and left, then aimed a kick at the shoji. Dislodged from its groove by the blow, the bottom of the door slid about 2 feet into the room. At the sound, the men who were supposed to storm into the room and intentionally fell back a pace, But in a matter of seconds, someone shouted for the attack, and all the other doors of the room clattered open. He's not here. The room's empty. Voices full of restored courage muttered disbelievingly. Musashi had been sitting there just a short while ago when someone had brought him the lamp. The lamp still burned, the cushion he had been sitting on was still there, the brazier still had a good fire in it, and there was a cup of untouched tea. But no Musashi. One man ran out on the veranda and let the others know that he had gotten away. From under the veranda and from dark spots in the garden, students and retainers assembled, stamping the ground angrily and cursing the man who had been standing guard on the small room. The guards, however, insisted that Musashi could not have gotten away. He had walked down to the toilet less than an hour earlier but had returned to the room immediately. There was no way he could have gotten out without being seen. Are you saying he is invisible, like the wind? One man asked scornfully. Just then, a man who had been poking around in a closet shouted, "Here's how he got away. See? These floorboards have been ripped up. It hasn't been very long since the lamp was trimmed. He can't have gone far. After him, if Musashi had indeed fled, he must at heart be a coward." The thought fired his pursuers with the fighting spirit that had been so notably lacking a bit earlier. They were streaming out the front, back, and side gates when someone yelled, "There he is!" Near the back gate, a figure shot out of the shadows, crossed the street, and entered a dark alley on the other side. Running like a hare, it swerved off to one side when it reached the wall at the end of the alley. 2 or 3 of the students caught up with the man on the road between the Kuyado and the burned ruins of the Honnoji. "Coward! Run away, will you? After what you did today?" There was the sound of heavy scuffling and kicking and a defiant howl. The captured man had regained his strength and was turning on his captors. In an instant, the 3 men who had been dragging him by the back of his neck plummeted to the ground. The man's sword was about to descend on them when a 4th man ran up and shouted, "Wait, it's a mistake. He's not the one we are after." Matahachi lowered his sword and the men got to their feet. "Hey, you are right, that's not Musashi." As they were standing there looking perplexed, Toji arrived on the scene. "Did you catch him?" he asked. "Round man, not the one who caused all the trouble." Toji took a closer look at the captive and said with astonishment, "Is that the man you were chasing?" "Yes, you know him. I saw him just today at the Yomogi tea house." While they eyed Matahachi silently and suspiciously, he calmly straightened his tousled hair and brushed off his kimono. "Is he the master of the Yomogi?" "No, the mistress of the place told me he wasn't. He seems to be just a hanger-on of some sort. He looks shady, all right. What was he doing around the gate, spying?" But Toji had already started to move on. "If we waste time with him, we will lose Musashi. Split up and get moving. If nothing else, we can at least find out where he's staying." There was a murmur of assent and they were off. Matahachi, facing the moat of the Honnoji, stood silently with his head bowed while the men ran by. As the last one passed, he called out to him. The man stopped. "What do you want?" he asked, going toward him. Matahachi asked, "How old was this man called Musashi? How would I know?" "Would you say he was about my age?" "I guess that's about right." "Yes." "Is he from the village of Miyamoto in Mimasaka province?" "Yes." "I guess Musashi is another way of reading the 2 characters used to write Takezo, isn't it? Why are you asking all these questions?" "Is he a friend of yours?" "Oh no, I was just wondering." Well, in the future, why don't you just stay away from places where you don't belong? Otherwise, you might find yourself in some real trouble one of these days. With that warning, the man ran off. Matahachi started walking slowly beside the dark moat, stopping occasionally to look up at the stars. He didn't seem to have any particular destination. It is him, after all, he decided. He must have changed his name to Musashi and become a swordsman. I guess he must be pretty different from the way he used to be. He slid his hands into his obi and began kicking a stone along with the toe of his sandal. Every time he kicked, he seemed to see Takezo's face before him. It's not the right time, he mumbled. He would be ashamed. I would be ashamed for him to see me the way I am now. I have got enough pride not to want him to look down on me. If that Yoshioka bunch catches up with him, though, they are likely to kill him. Wonder where he is. I would like at least to warn him. Encounter and retreat. Along the stony path leading up to the Kiyomizudera temple stood a row of shabby houses, their plank roofs lined up like rotten teeth and so old that moss covered their eaves. Under the hot noonday sun, the street reeked of salted fish broiling over charcoal. A dish flew through the door of one of the ramshackle hovels and broke into smithereens on the street. A man of about 50, apparently an artisan of sorts, came tumbling out after it. Close on his heels was his barefooted wife, her hair a tangled mess and her tits hanging down like a cow's. What are you saying, you lout? She screamed shrilly. You go off, leave your wife and children to starve, then come crawling back like a worm. From inside the house came the sound of children crying and nearby a dog howl. She caught up with the man, seized him by his top knot, and began beating him. Now, where do you think you are going, you old fool? Neighbors rushed up, trying to restore order. Musashi smiled ironically and turned back toward the ceramics shop. For some time before the domestic battle erupted, he had been standing just outside it, watching the porters with childlike fascination. The two men inside were unaware of his presence. Eyes riveted on their work, they seemed to have entered into the clay, become a part of it. Their concentration was complete. Musashi would have liked to have a try at working with the clay. Since boyhood, he had enjoyed doing things with his hands, and he thought he might at least be able to make a simple tea bowl. Just then, however, one of the porters, an old man of nearly 60, started fashioning a tea bowl. Musashi, observing how deftly he moved his fingers and handled his spatula, realized he had overestimated his own abilities. It takes so much technique just to make a simple piece like that, he marveled. These days, he often felt deep admiration for other people's work. He found he respected technique, art, even the ability to do a simple task well, particularly if it was a skill he himself had not mastered. In one corner of the shop, on a makeshift counter made of an old door panel, stood rows of plates, jars, sake cups, and pitchers. They were sold as souvenirs for the paltry sum of 20 or 30 pieces of cash to people on their way to and from the temple. In stark contrast to the honestness the porters devoted to their work was the humbleness of their boarded shack. Musashi wondered whether they always had enough to eat. Life, it appeared, wasn't as easy as it sometimes seemed. Contemplating the skill, concentration, and devotion put into making wares, even as cheap as these, made Musashi feel he still had a long way to go if he was ever to reach the level of perfection in swordsmanship that he aspired to. The thought was a sobering one, for in the past 3 weeks, he had visited other well-known training centers in Kyoto besides the Yoshioka School and had begun to wonder whether he had not been too critical of himself since his confinement at Himeji. His expectation had been to find Kyoto full of men who had mastered the martial arts. It was, after all, the imperial capital, as well as the former seat of the Ashikaga shogunate, and it had long been a gathering place for famous generals and legendary warriors. During his stay, however, he had not found a single training center that had taught him anything to be genuinely grateful for. Instead, at each school he had experienced disappointment. Though he always won his bouts, he was unable to decide whether this was because he was good or his opponents were bad. In either case, if the samurai he had met were typical, the country was in sorry shape. Encouraged by his success, he had reached the point of taking a certain pride in his expertise, but now, reminded of the danger of vanity, he felt chastened. He mentally bowed in deep respect to the clay-smudged old man at the wheel and started up the steep slope to Kiyomizudera. He had not gone far when a voice called to him from below. "You there, sir?" "The Ronin. Do you mean me?" asked Musashi, turning around. Judging from the man's padded cotton garment, his bare legs, and the pole he carried, he was a palanquin bearer by trade. From behind his beard, he said, politely enough for one of his lowly status, "Sir, is your name Miyamoto?" "Yes, thank you." The man turned and went down toward Chawan Hill. Musashi watched him enter what appeared to be a tea house. Passing through the area a while earlier, he had noticed a large crowd of porters and palanquin bearers standing about in a standing spot. He couldn't imagine who had sent one of them to ask his name, but supposed that whoever it was would soon come to meet him. He stood there a while, but when no one appeared, resumed his climb. He stopped along the way to look at several well-known temples, and at each of them he bowed and said two prayers. One was, "Please protect my sister from harm." The other was, "Please test the lowly Musashi with hardship. Let him become the greatest swordsman in the land, or let him die." Arriving at the edge of a cliff, he dropped his basket hat on the ground and sat down. From there he could look out over the whole city of Kyoto. As he sat clasping his knees, a simple but powerful ambition welled up in his young breast. "I want to lead an important life. I want to do it because I was born a human being." He had once read that in the 10th century, two rebels named Taira no Masakado and Fujiwara no Sumitomo, both wildly ambitious, had gotten together and decided that if they emerged from the wars victorious, they would divide Japan up between them. The story was probably apocryphal to begin with, but Musashi remembered thinking at the time how stupid and unrealistic it would have been for them to believe they could carry out so grandiose a scheme. Now, however, he no longer felt it laughable. While his own dream was of a different sort, there were certain similarities. If the young cannot harbor great dreams in their souls, who can? At the moment, Musashi was imagining how he could create a place of his own in the world. He thought of Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi, of their visions of unifying Japan, and of the many battles they had fought to that end. But it was clear that the path to greatness no longer lay in winning battles. Today, the people wanted only the peace for which they had thirsted so long. And as Musashi considered the long struggle Tokugawa Ieyasu had to endure to make this desire a reality, he realized once again how hard it was to hold fast to one's ideal. This is a new age, he thought. I have the rest of my life before me. I came along too late to follow in the footsteps of Nobunaga or Hideyoshi, but I can still dream of my own world to conquer. No one can stop me from doing that. Even that pelican bearer must have a dream of some sort. For a moment he put these ideas out of his mind and tried to view his situation objectively. He had his sword, and the way of the sword was the way he had chosen. It might be fine to be a Hideyoshi or an Ieyasu, but the times no longer had use for people of their particular talents. Ieyasu had everything neatly tied up. There was no more need for bloody wars. In Kyoto stretched out below him, life was no longer a touch-and-go affair. For Musashi, the important thing from now on would be his sword and the society around him, his swordsmanship as it related to existing as a human being. In a moment of insight, he was satisfied that he had found the link between the martial arts and his own visions of greatness. As he sat lost in thought, the pelican bearer's face came into view beneath the cliff. He pointed his bamboo pole at Musashi and shouted, "There he is, up there." Musashi looked down to where the porters were milling about and shouting. They began climbing the hill toward him. He got to his feet and, trying to ignore them, walked farther up the hill, but soon discovered that his path was blocked. Locking arms and thrusting out their poles, a sizable group of men had encircled him at a distance. Looking over his shoulder, he saw that the man behind him had come to a halt. One of them grinned, showing his teeth, and informed the others that Musashi seemed to be staring at a plaque or something. Musashi, now before the steps of the Hongando, was indeed gazing up at a weather-beaten plaque hanging from the crossbeam of the temple entrance. He felt ill at ease and wondered if he should try frightening them away with a battle cry. Even though he knew he could make quick work of them, there was no point in brawling with a bunch of lowly laborers. It was probably all a mistake anyway. If so, they would disperse sooner or later. He stood there patiently, reading and rereading the words on the plaque. "Original vow, here she comes," one of the porters cried. They began talking among themselves in hushed tones. Musashi's impression was that they were walking themselves into a frenzy. The compound within the western gate of the temple had quickly filled with people, and now priests, pilgrims, and vendors were straining their eyes to see what was going on. Their faces brimming with curiosity, they formed cycles outside the ring of porters surrounding Musashi. From the direction of Sennen Hill came the rhythmical, pace-setting chants of men carrying a load. The voices came closer and closer until two men entered the temple grounds bearing on their backs an old woman and a rather tired-looking country samurai. From her porter's back, Osugi waved her hand briskly and said, "This will do." The bearer bent his legs, and as she jumped spryly to the ground, she thanked him. Turning to Uncle Gon, she said, "We won't let him get away this time, will we?" The two were clothed and shod as though they expected to spend the rest of their lives traveling. "Where is he?" called Osugi. One of the bearers said, "Over there," and pointed proudly toward the temple. Uncle Gon moistened the handle of his sword with the spittle, and the two pushed through the cycle of people. "Take your time," cautioned one of the porters. "He looks pretty tough," said another. "Just make sure you are well prepared," advised still another. While the laborers offer words of encouragement and support to Osugi, the spectators look on in dismay. Is the old woman actually planning to challenge that Ronin to a duel? Looks that way, but she's so old, even her second is shaky on his legs. They must have good reason to try taking on a man so much younger. Must be a family feud of some kind. Look at that now, will you? She's lighting into the old man. Some of these old grannies really have guts, don't they? A porter ran up with a dipper of water for Osugi. After drinking a mouthful, she handed it to Uncle Gon and addressed him sternly. "Now see that you don't get flustered, because there's nothing to be flustered about. Takezo's a man of straw. Oh, he may have learned a little about using a sword, but he couldn't have learned all that much. Just stay calm." Taking the lead, she went straight to the front staircase of the Hogando and sat down on the steps, not 10 paces from Musashi. Paying no attention whatever either to him or to the crowd watching her, she took out her prayer beads and, closing her eyes, began moving her lips. Inspired by her religious fervor, Uncle Gon put his hands together and did likewise. The sight proved to be a little too melodramatic, and one of the spectators started snickering. Immediately, one of the porters spun around and said challengingly, "Who thinks this is funny? This is no laughing matter, you imbecile. The old woman has come all the way from Mimasaka to find the good-for-nothing who ran off with her son's bride. She has been praying at the temple here every day for almost 2 months, and today he finally showed up. These samurai are different from the rest of us," was the opinion of another porter. At that age, the old woman could be living comfortably at home, playing with her grandchildren, but no, here she is, in place of her son, seeking to avenge an insult to her family. If nothing else, she deserves our respect. A third one said, "We are not supporting her just because she has been giving us tips. She has got spirits. She has. Old as she is not afraid to die. She is not afraid to fight. I say we should give her all the help we can. It's only right to help the underdog. If she should lose, let's take care of the Ronin ourselves." "You are right, but let's do it now. We can't stand here and let her get herself killed." As the crowd learned of the reasons for Osugi's being there, the excitement mounted. Some of the spectators began goading the porters on. Osugi put her prayer beads back into her kimono, and a hush fell over the temple grounds. "Takezo," she called loudly, putting her left hand on the short sword at her waist. Musashi had all the while been standing by in silence. Even when Osugi called out his name, he acted as if he hadn't heard. Unnerved by this, Uncle Gon at Osugi's side chose this moment to assume an attacking stance, and thrusting his head forward, uttered a cry of challenge. Musashi again failed to respond. He couldn't. He simply did not know how to. He recalled Takuen's having warned him in Himeji that he might run into Osugi. He was prepared to ignore her completely, but he was very upset by the talk the porters had been spreading among the mob. Furthermore, it was difficult for him to restrain his resentment at the hatred the Hoendians had harbored against him all the time. The whole affair amounted to nothing more than a petty matter of face and feelings in the little village of Miyamoto, a misunderstanding that could be easily cleared up if only Mother Hachi were present. Nevertheless, he was at a loss as to what to do here and now. How was one to respond to a challenge from a doddering old woman and a shrunken-faced samurai? Musashi stared on in silence, his mind in a quandary. Look at the bastard, he's afraid, a porter shouted. Be a man, let the old woman kill you, taunted another. There was not a soul who was not on Osugi's side. The old woman blinked her eyes and shook her head. Then she looked at the bearers and snapped angrily, Shut up! I just want you as witnesses. If the two of us should happen to be killed, I want you to send our bodies back to Miyamoto. Otherwise, I don't need your talk and I don't want your help. Pulling her short sword partway out of its scabbard, she took a couple of steps in Musashi's direction. Takezo, she said again. Takezo was always your name in the village, so why don't you answer to it? I have heard you have taken a fine new name. Miyamoto Musashi, is it? But you will always be Takezo to me. Ha ha ha. Her wrinkled neck quivered as she laughed. Evidently, she hoped to kill Musashi with words before swords were drawn. Did you think you could keep me from tracking you down just by changing your name? How stupid! The gods in heaven have guided me to you, as I knew they would. Now fight! We'll see whether I take your head home with me or you manage somehow to stay alive. And Gogon, in his withered voice, issued his own challenge. It has been 4 long years since you gave us the slip, and we've been searching for you all this time. Now our prayers here at the Kiyomizudera have brought you into our grasp. Oh, I may be, but I'm not going to lose to the likes of you. Prepare to die. Whipping out his sword, he cried to Osugi, Get out of the way. She turned on him furiously. What do you mean, you old fool? You are the one who's shaking. Never mind, the bodhisattvas of this temple will protect us. You are right, Uncle Gon, and the ancestors of the Hoendians are with us too. There's nothing to fear. Takezo, come forward and fight. What are you waiting for? Musashi did not move. He stood there like a deaf mute, staring at the 2 old people and their drawn swords. Osugi cried, What's the matter, Takezo? Are you scared? She edged sideways, preparing to attack, but suddenly tripped on a rock and pitched forward, landing on her hands and knees almost at Musashi's feet. The crowd gasped and someone screamed, She'll be killed! Quick, save her! But Uncle Gon only stared at Musashi's face. The old woman then startled one and all by snatching up her sword and walking back to Uncle Gon's side, where she again took a challenging stance. What's wrong, you loud? Osugi cried. Is that sword in your hand just an ornament? Don't you know how to use it? Musashi's face was like a mask, but he spoke at last in a thunderous voice. I can't do it. He started walking toward them, and Uncle Gon and Osugi instantly fell back to either side. Where are you going, Takezo? I can't use my sword. Stop! Why don't you stop and fight? I told you I can't use it. He walked straight ahead, looking neither right nor left. He marched directly through the crowd without once swerving. Recovering her senses, Osugi cried, "He's running away, don't let him escape." The crowd now moved in on Musashi, but when they thought they had him hemmed in, they discovered he was no longer there. Their bewilderment was acute. Eyes flared in surprise, then became dull patches in blank faces. Breaking up into smaller groups, they continued until sunset to run about, searching frantically under the floors of the temple buildings and in the woods for their vanished prey. Still later, as people were going back down the darkened slopes of Sanan and Chawan hills, one man swore that he had seen Musashi jump with the effortless